Hi, my name is Ned Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Let's talk for about 45 minutes, maybe less, maybe more, depending on what you guys want to do, about SAT versus the ACT. And then as we cascade through the next weeks and months, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of these two tests, give you tips and information about how to do your best on each of these tests. But for now, the conversation is really about how to help you decide whether the SAT is the test for you, the ACT is the test for you, maybe both, maybe neither, but I have ideally answers to all those questions for you. So which test is better for you? We're going to talk in sort of big picture structure about the difference between the two tests. I'll get into some kind of nitty-gritty details about the English on the ACT compared to the writing on the SAT, reading that's on both, all the details that I hope will matter to you. But again, at any point that you feel like you have a question, you can throw something up there in the Q&A. I will start with the first question now in our poll, which hopefully doesn't distract you too much, and then I'll jump into talking about the test. So first question, have you already taken the SAT, ACT, SAT, both or neither? So when you have a moment, answer that, and I'll go through to our next slide. Pull this out of the way. So let me talk big picture about the SAT, the ACT, why these things matter, and kind of how they figure in college admissions. This is kind of rough timeline of standardized tests that some of you might have taken the SAT or another test like that for high school admissions. More likely, most of you have your first standardized test, an out-of-school standardized test. There was the PSAT. I'm assuming that most of you guys are juniors, so you probably took the PSAT in October of junior year, which feels like 10,000 years ago. I know. A lot of you probably also took the PSAT in sophomore year, October of your sophomore year. Now, towards the end of junior year, we're looking at the SAT versus ACT. Some of you are also going to be talking about looking at the AP. For those of you in the full IB program or partial IB program, my understanding is that they actually kind of canceled those tests for the year, so I'm sorry for that. 10-second advertorial, I guess. For the APs, my understanding is, you probably have gotten this message from the College Board, APs are still going on. They're going to have the test scheduled in May as they were, but then also test later in June. And they've shrunk the test, right? They're now going to be these virtual tests done entirely online. No multiple choice, no essays, only free response is my understanding. My colleagues who are doing Prep Matters Television, who know stuff about those in ways that I don't, will be talking about those, but you'll be doing those tests. And then we'll maybe spend a little bit of time at the end talking about the subject test towards the end. So here's kind of the big picture structure of understanding where standardized tests matter in the whole process of college admissions. Before I jump into this, for people who do really well on standardized tests, I have some good news for you. For people who shine in all sorts of ways in school, in class, and tests, in leadership, and community service, and sports, and arts, music, all those things, and standardized tests are not your greatest thing, you feel like they're going to work against you, I have some good news for that for you too. But for those of you who kind of are really excited to take these standardized tests, believe that they're really going to allow you to show how capable you are in ways in addition to grades. Let me run through this. So you see that this was a big poll that was done of college admissions folks and saying what matters to those college admissions people when they're looking at you guys as applicants and saying what matters to them to assess you guys and say, should we admit these people or maybe let them go someplace else. The most important thing, even though I'm a college admissions guy, is the grades in your courses. How well you've done in 3 years of high school or 4 years of high school is the single best indicator of how you're going to do in college. So that's what really matters to colleges as well. So that's great news for those of you who are super academic. Fantastic. Second, the grades in college prep courses. So maybe we toss out chorus, we toss out vocational classes that you might have. We toss out photography, we toss out yearbook. We're really looking at those core academic classes of English, math, history, science, foreign languages. Those second most important criterion. And then the third thing is admissions test scores, SAT and ACT. We'll talk about test score optional schools on the next page, but for a lot of colleges, how people do on SAT or ACT is really important to them. Partly it's another way for them to evaluate you. Partly also there's this magazine you might have heard about called the US News and World Report that since 1988 has created this ranking of the best 100 plus colleges and universities in the country, the 100 plus best colleges. And how the students who've been admitted there do on the SAT or ACT is one of the many criteria used to evaluate, is this school a little bit more academic than that school? So because those schools matter for the rankings, and because colleges care about kind of how people see them, that's one of the big reasons that these ACT or SAT scores matter. There is some data that ACT scores and SAT scores also do a pretty solid job of predicting how people are going to do in college. Colleges also like to use those. But again, as I started before, the most important criterion for you as a student and for colleges looking at you as an applicant is, how are you going to do, how have you done in your high school grades, your high school courses, because those are the best indicators of how you're going to do in college courses. So we see a bunch of other things that matter there. Obviously, it's grades, ACT, SAT, the strength of the curriculum, meaning an A in an AP class is stronger than an AP in a non-AP class. And then it falls off pretty quickly thereafter. So basically, it's those first four things that are really looking at academic rigor. There are all sorts of special considerations, but if you want to hear more about those, the other channel on one of the other channels on PM television are my colleagues, fabulous colleagues, Jeff Knox and Katie Dunn, who have all these webinars about what matters for college, how to start your resume now, how to think about essays for the Common App, all those things that you guys are going to start to get into. So if you haven't checked those out yet, I encourage you to do so. They're super fun, they're super engaging, and these guys really know what they're doing. So shameless plug for more Prep Matters Television. Okay. So I may mention that I know that there's some people who are online who've probably just crushed school and they've done everything really well, and then they get to the SAT or the PSAT and they go, and you think, oh no, I'm toast. Not necessarily true. I'm going to talk big picture about college admission, test optional colleges every other year, and then actually about a little nuances coming up this year for all this in the middle of coronavirus. So I want to give a quick shout out to my fabulous colleagues, friends over a group called fairtest.org. They are committed to the reformation, in some ways the diminution of the role of standardized tests in college admissions. They make a very compelling argument that these tests are at best problematic, at worst deeply flawed in ways that really work against certain groups of people. Generally, folks who have less means or have less wealth in their family, and also generally kids who are underrepresented minority groups. And so these tests have been shown not to be as consistent in evaluating everyone in ways that are equal. And so Fair Test is pushing hard on this. And they also on their website maintain a list of 1,000 plus colleges and universities that are test optional, meaning you can apply to all these colleges and never send them an SAT, never send them an ACT, never send them an AP. And so Bates, Bowdoin, Colby, these are some of the ones that have been kicking around doing this forever. Last year, the University of Chicago, which is one of the most highly selective universities in the country, the kids who go there are super academic, my word, super nerdy, and they kind of groove on that. You can't find a college that has more capable learners. And University of Chicago said, hey, we can have a great group of kids. We don't need this SAT or ACT. If you rocked it and you want to send it to us, totally cool. But again, if you shine in all sorts of ways and these tests are just not your jam, totally fine. So if you're one of those people who just grades in school and the SAT, it doesn't quite meet the mark, slide over there and spend some time on fairtest.org. They're wonderful folks, a really great resource. And even for those of you who are planning to take the SAT and ACT, and I hope that's everyone on this call, for you to know that you have a plan B, that you're going to work super hard and try to kick the stuffing out of the SAT or ACT, but to know that if I don't quite do this, that this test score optional, that is something that probably makes it easier for you. You kind of go for the trapeze, and if you know there's a net that you will fall on, it's much easier to sort of jump off that platform. Additionally, if there is ever a year that test score optional is going to rule the day, it is this year for the class of 2021. There are all these colleges that have said, we're going to be test score optional for this year. Going forward, maybe, but definitely for this year. So the entire university system of California, test score optional. Pomona College, really lovely, very academic liberal arts college, test score optional. There are dozens of them, and every single day they're popping up. What this means is that again, if you shine in ways but not in scores, you don't have to send scores. If you can't get to the thing because they keep canceling the darn thing, it's okay. For those of you who really shine on scores, know that with more people going test score optional, if you can take the test and figure out a way to make it work, and more importantly, if you can do really well on that, that's a super great feather in your cap. So if you do well on these scores, this is the year they're going to help you like crazy. If you can't take them or you don't do well, this is going to be the year where you won't be penalized for not having them. Okay? All right, let's keep on rolling here. So just talk about, again, you two guys took the PSAT. The big thing to know about the PSAT is that how you did on the PSAT is a pretty good marker of how you would have done had you taken an SAT a week or a month later. So if you did really well on the PSAT, that's a really good indication you should do just as well or even better on the SAT. But for those who did not do well on the PSAT, please know that it's not like, I'm screwed. Not the case, in part because depending on what math class you are doing, there are a lot of content, a lot of questions on the PSAT that you just didn't know in October of your junior year that now you do know, okay? So a low score, what feels like a low score for you on the PSAT does not mean that you cannot do well on the SAT. That is just where you were at that particular point. And again, over the course of weeks and months that we hopefully will all work together, I'll try to take wherever you were and help you do even better. But big picture, what I want you to think about for the PSAT, because the purpose of this conversation today is to help you make an informed decision. Am I an SAT person? Am I an ACT person? Am I kind of neck and neck, or they're both great or neither is good? Simply know this, that your experience with the PSAT is a really good proxy, a really good indication of what your likely experience would be on the SAT if you didn't do anything differently, okay? Know, of course, that the colleges will never see your PSAT. So if you fell asleep and drooled on the answer sheet and got the worst score in the history of the PSAT, no college will know about that. If you did brilliantly and were the top, there's that whole National Merit Scholarship thing. You'll find out about that later, and that's another feather in your cap. But PSAT, pretty good proxy for the SAT. Okay, moving on. Big picture, let me ask this again. Oh, I had another question. So have you already taken, so people have taken, really quickly, about 10% of people have taken both the SAT and the ACT. A bunch of people have, most people have not taken either of these yet. I know there are probably people who are like, I was so ready for March, and then that virus thing you might have heard about, it's in the news a little bit lately. So presumably most of you are looking to take the SAT or the ACT as soon as it comes up next. I have another question. Actually, let me do this. So which test do you plan to take, or do you not know? I should have said don't know yet, but all right. Multitasking as we go. So I'm going to assume that you guys know sort of about the SAT because you've done the PSAT, okay? I'm going to assume that we don't yet know that much about the ACT, so I'm really going to try to talk about the ACT relative to the SAT. So what you see here is the PSAT that had a score that went from 200 to 1520 is basically the same thing as an SAT, 400 to 1600. The ACT, of course, has this score of 1 to 36. We're going to talk in a moment about how the heck do you compare those two things. Big thing to know, for the ACT, it's the composite score that matters. And the composite means they take the English, math, reading, and science, they add those guys up, they divide by 4, they find the average. That's the composite score. That's what matters most to colleges. The individual scores, not nearly so much. They really just want the composite score, because if you go back to what I talked about a moment ago, the ranking of colleges, the U.S. News and World Report, their U.S. News and World Report is looking at the composite. Which way does it go? Composite. Anyway, the composite score. And for the SAT, they're looking at the total of reading, writing score, 200 to 800, average math, 200 to 800. That's really what matters most. Don't get stuck in the weeds in terms of college. You can think about this, that, the other. It's really those big picture scores that matter to college. You see there on the SAT, I've talked about the cross-test scores. These are things that are really used because for states. Some state education, some states, their Department of Education have decided to use the SAT or the ACT for a high school exit exam, meaning you have to show basic proficiency to get a high school degree. And there's this kind of battle between College Board and the ACT trying to convince states to use our test. You know, my test, your test. And these cross-test scores for the SAT is how they're trying to get at kind of these more diverse areas that the ACT already has. And we have a science section. So College Board is trying to give some data to these school systems and maybe also kind of one up the ACT by saying, look, we actually have not only a science score, but a history and social science, social studies score. Here's the deal. Don't worry about this at all. You will never, ever, ever find a college that cares about those, that lists those. Again, it's just a big picture score. So that's about the sum total of energy that we need to spend looking at that, that part of the SAT. So one of the things, if you've gotten a PSAT score and then you take an ACT, and this we'll talk about this at the end, you're trying to say, well, which of these things is better? College Board, who makes the SAT, and ACT, who unsurprisingly makes the ACT, worked up this concordance table that will tell them that basically a 25 on the ACT is kind of like a 1200, 1210, so 1220 on the SAT. If you get an SAT score of 910, that's sort of like an ACT score of 16. So if you're trying to figure out which score is better, if you took a practice test of each, you can use a concordance table. If you don't memorize this, you can simply Google SAT, ACT, and Google will probably finish with comparison or concordance table or something like that, okay? Looking at other questions, okay, great. Actually go back here really quickly, which leads me to the question that people always ask, and I'm sure someone will ask this later, what's a good SAT score? What's a good ACT score? Here's the answer to that question. A good SAT score, a good ACT score is one that puts you really in the mix, that makes you a strong candidate for the colleges that you want to apply to. What colleges should you be applying to? Again, where we started, the most important thing is grades. So if you have a GPA of a 3.2, you can look at, and with your college counselor, figure out what are the colleges that puts me in the running for. I have a GPA of a 3.7, I have a 4.2, I have whatever. And you start first with your grades and you look at colleges. And then of course, among those colleges that you're in the running for, you say, well, do I like this college, right? Do I like this college? For the colleges that you like and you're reasonably confident that's a good college for me to apply to, some that are reachy, some that are safety, and some in between, you look at each of those colleges and you can go on Google and find what's the average score there. Now, what they will publish is the average ACT score, average SAT score for the 25th to 75th percentiles. So meaning 0%, so no people to all people, 25th to 75th percentiles are the people who are right in between. And you want to be squarely in the middle of that range. Ideally, maybe a little bit towards the top of that if you can. The people under the 25th percentile, oftentimes people who have some special talent or special reason that college is really trying to get them in, or they have the best grades in the history of the world, but their SAT or ACT score is low. You don't have to be above 75th percentile unless your grades are low for the college, and then maybe you elevate yourself with a really high score. But generally, a good score is something that puts you squarely in the middle of that score range for the colleges that are exciting to you and where we're really lined up because of your grades. So I will not tell you that a 1400 is a great score or 1400 is a terrible score. It's a perfectly independent thing. Or that 1000 is a terrible score, 1000 is a great score. It entirely depends on where you're trying to go to college. Okay? So diagnostic testing, this basically means if you're taking practice tests and you're trying to use that to figure out how am I doing, but also should I be taking the ACT or the SAT? Again, the whole purpose of this conversation we're having here on Friday afternoon, thank you again for joining me, is that the PSAT is a great diagnostic tool, a great predictor of how you'll do on the SAT, but not such a hot one for the ACT. We're going to talk through about what goes on in the ACT, but the big thing is that to figure out how you're going to do on the ACT, chances are you're going to have to take an ACT. You really can't predict from your PSAT. The reality is that if you worked hard on both of these, most people will do about the same on the SAT and on the ACT, but there are some people for whom the ACT goes way better than the SAT, and some people for whom the SAT goes way better than the ACT. So I simply cannot say whether your PSAT overpredicts how you do on the SAT, gets it just about right, or completely underpredicts how you'll do on the ACT. And that's why I want to have this conversation, because if there's an unrealized potential for all of you, I want to explore that. Biggest takeaway about the ACT compared to the SAT is this. Most of my students, when they look at the ACT, say two things. One, it feels more straightforward than what I did on the SAT. It feels kind of more like what I've done in school. I kind of get this. Yeah, there's some stuff that's hard, but I don't feel like they're kind of trying to trick me. The second thing is that most people feel like the ACT it's faster. It's a little bit more intense. They don't feel as rushed on the SAT as they do on the ACT. So one of the things that you're going to need to figure out, and I'm going to try to help you figure out, is which of those things predominates, which of those things helps you more. The fact that the ACT is more straightforward, that helps me, or the fact that it's really trying to time that works against me. And again, we'll talk through these two concepts for each of the four sections, and then leave you to do some practice to figure out on your own what's your own experience. You see there at the bottom, we talk about the pace. The ACT has a fast pace. The SAT has a slower pace, okay? Score distribution, this is basically just trying to help you know kind of where you are with scores. I get people all the time say the scores are terrible relative to their peers, and then they realize nationwide they're like, above almost everyone else in the country that said they had no idea. In terms of test scores, Washington, D.C. area, Bethesda, Maryland, Virginia, these are some pretty rough neighborhoods when it comes to the SAT or PSAT or ACT. And so you can feel like, I got the worst score ever, because everyone in the world, got a 37 on the ACT and a 1700 on the SAT, which I know is not possible, but I'm just being silly, of course. And you feel like, oh my gosh. And then when you look at how you've done across the rest of the country, you may realize, oh my gosh, I've really done quite well. And I just want to share that with you because again, the DMV is a little bit of a rough neighborhood when it comes to standardized tests. We use just the SAT, but you're going to compare the ACT. The SAT is designed so that 1,000 is the average. Okay, they're slightly above that, but 1,000 is slightly above that, and you basically have half the population of people taking the test are below 1,000 and half the population above. That's the easiest way, and this is why college is kind of like the SAT and kind of like the ACT, because they can know if you got a 1210, kind of where that puts you nationwide compared to everyone else who might be applying to college. All right, so let's dig into the structure of the ACT versus the structure of the SAT. In 2016, the SAT changed itself to make the SAT a lot like the ACT. The only reason this really matters for you is that the hard work that you might be doing or might have already done, actually I should ask this question, I got another poll for you. The question I basically have is kind of what people have done for preparation. We'll get there. Oh, by the way, everyone here wanted to take the ACT. That is fascinating to me. I would not have expected that. Okay, so the point here is that if you're planning for, we got 100% of people who are planning to take the SAT and ACT. That's actually a good thing this year because it's a little uncertain when the SAT is going to run, when the ACT is going to run. It's a bad thing in my view in that there are some differences between the SAT and the ACT. And if you discover that one test is much more your test, I encourage you to put all of your heart and soul into that one test because there's no college where you would ever need both the SAT and the ACT. So if you can figure out that you're already naturally better at one than the other, I'd encourage you to push super hard on that test. But the differences are more about kind of the flavor, the experience, the pacing. The underlying content between the SAT and the ACT is extremely similar. And again, this reflects the change that College Board made to the SAT in 2016. By design, they've made the SAT more like the ACT, and that's good for you guys as students, because if you work super hard on all the nerdy math on the ACT, but then decides you want to take the SAT because that's the only time that you could take it, all that hard work on the ACT will help you on the SAT. Or if you gun super hard on the SAT, you've nerded out on all the grammar, and then you discover that you like the reading on the ACT better, all that hard work you've already done on the writing of the SAT is still going to help you on the ACT. So you're not doing this, you're kind of doing this. There are differences between the tests, but you're not, if you want to jump from one to the other, it's not a huge chasm that you have to jump over, if that makes sense. So I made mention that the ACT is faster, and nowhere is that more apparent than in the reading comprehension. Okay? The reading comprehension on the ACT, you have 53 seconds a question. On the reading on the SAT, 75. About a 50% difference, right? That's real. Okay? The reality, though, is that there's a reason for that. The reading on the ACT is faster because it's easier. The reading on the ACT, they give you more time because it's harder, and we'll go through this bit by bit. English is a similar thing. Math is a similar thing. The math questions on the SAT, many people often feel they're a little bit more tricky. So some of the questions on the SAT are harder, but they give you more time to do them. The science we'll talk about at the end. A lot of people, that's kind of the thing that they're most unfamiliar with, but we'll convince you that this is something that you can handle well, and we'll explore what's going on with that. So for me, if you're going to use one section of the test to try to figure out whether you're more of an ACT kid or an SAT kid, it would be the reading comprehension. Because, as I said just a slide ago, the hard work that you will do for the grammar and the punctuation for the ACT English or for the SAT writing are very, very similar. Okay? The hard work that you're going to do both to learn content, learn or review content for the SAT or ACT, along with some ideally tricks that will help you kind of be more clever when you take the test, will apply equally to the SAT and ACT. The biggest schism, the biggest discrepancy, the biggest difference is really on the reading comprehension of the SAT versus the reading comp of the ACT. And I just want to go through this. We already talked about how the reading on the ACT is kind of fast, and the reading on the SAT, they give you more time to think. And the reason for that is that the reading on the ACT is simply more straightforward. The reading on the SAT is by design harder. And I'm going to start with the ACT. The questions are pretty straightforward. Actually, I'm going to start with the SAT. The reason that the SAT has become more difficult is by design, they put in a mix of both fiction and nonfiction, but also kind of old-fashioned English, kind of Jane Austen, Jane Eyre type stuff, some really nerdy science, and these double passages that are kind of the global conversation about, Frederick Douglass, and two passages, people talking about, suffrage or what have you. And so we have things that are kind of nerdy from history. We have things that are kind of nerdy from science. We have things that are kind of nerdy from English. And rarely do people feel all super, super comfortable with all of these things. They're different flavors of reading. They're still reading skills, but they're different, right? Also, the SAT has made some of the passages pretty straightforward, and most people feel really comfortable and go and get almost all of the questions right. But they've also made some of the questions that are like, wow, that's kind of tricky. And a lot of people don't get those questions right. And that's okay. We're going to talk through about how to prepare for that. On the ACT, in many ways, all the questions are very, very, very answerable. You're not going to have that experience of, gosh, B and D are both good. How do I figure these out? It's simply the matter for the ACT that you need to be fast enough that you can be precise. You need to be efficient with time so that you have enough time to be precise. The SAT, even if you had enough time, there might be some questions that you just really struggle to figure out. And you remember this from the PSAT. I understood the passage, I understood the question, but these were equally good. So the way that I want you, we have a whole session later on talking about this, but if you've done a PSAT and you've yet to do an ACT, the first section that I would start with would be the ACT reading section, because if you can really handle that well, and that goes better for you than it does the reading on the SAT, then chances are the ACT will be the test for you. This is where there's the biggest difference between the two tests, and so probably the one that you want to tackle first. Higher diction means just geekier words. If you don't know that word, grandiloquent lexicon, basically nerdy words. ACT is a little bit more straightforward, a little bit tighter on time. Okay? If you have questions about that, pop them up. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next section, talking about, oh, forgotten about this. We put these things in here. Where's Waldo, right? Okay, the ACT math is both the ACT and SAT are really designed to test the math that you've learned up to this point and much of the math of junior year. So for those of you who've yet to take the test, that's an awesome thing, because if you had taken this test in October or November or December, there would have been a bunch of stuff that for most of you, unless you're in super advanced math track, you just hadn't learned yet. So a lot of people are now doing trigonometry. Now they've done the unit circle. Now they understand radians. And a lot of those questions that would have been kind of a head scratcher to you in September, you now know how to do. If you take a look at these charts really quickly, the biggest difference that you'll see is that the ACT has more algebra. Okay? And there's frankly a lot more stuff on the ACT math. But, as I mentioned before, it is kind of more straightforward. So it kind of feels like taking a final exam on 3 years of math, a little bit of everything. We've got remainders, we've got, we've got algebra, we've got, exponents, we've got trigonometry, we've got standard deviation, we've got kind of one of everything that's on here. But they rarely are kind of curveball-y hard questions. The SAT, on the flip side, tests less stuff, but tends to go deeper, in their words. In my words, maybe a little bit tricky. And a lot of this has to do with the redesign of the SAT was about testing the math that people are going to use in college. And the big chunk of that is algebra and linear modeling, which basically means how do we express mathematically concepts and data that we might have in biology, psychology, or engineering, and the kind of applicable tools of math that are most widely used in the most disciplines for people in college. So again, all that means there are fewer things that are tested, tons and tons and tons of algebra in ways that are sophisticated. I might say sometimes a little tricky. College Board might say sophisticated. SAT, ACT rather, more straightforward, less tricky, but there's kind of more stuff that's on there. Okay? Questions? Throw them at me, but I'll keep on rolling because I want to get to questions all the way at the end. Basically, ACT, it's more punctuation. I have a feeling you all are pretty good with when to use commas, but I'm guessing that most of you aren't so hot on when to use a semicolon. For my purposes, I could probably write for 300 pages and never really feel the need to use a semicolon, and yet somehow it seems to pop up like every 7th question on the ACT and every 9th question on the SAT. Well, guess what we want to do? Learn our punctuation. The good news, though the ACT is like seriously hardcore about all the punctuation, they do it in a way that is incredibly rule-driven. And this is actually next week's class. It was colons, semicolons, and commas. Oh my, we're going to go through all the geeky, super nerdy rules of punctuation. And at first you may be like, are you kidding me? All these rules. Here's the great part. The fact that the rules is super, super helpful to you. It's not going to be judgment. It's not going to be, well, maybe on the one hand, It'll be totally rule-driven. The SAT, because it's tried to be like the ACT started in 2016, is also very rule-driven, but has some of the hardest writing questions really be reading comp questions. We talk about transitions and flow, which really becomes not just the grammar punctuation, but understanding the relationship of these sentences, of these ideas, and how do we make the best transitions? How do we join these sentences? So it is really proofreading a paper on the ACT all about the punctuation, on the SAT proofreading for the flow and the coherence of ideas. Some people like one more than the other. We're going to go really deep into stuff next week, but know that generally the tools that you use for one test and the tools that you use for the other, very, very, very tight overlap, probably 85%, some small differences. Good news for both of these sections of the test, for the vast majority of you, you won't have a problem with time on this. You might, if you're looking at these two tests, figure out, do I feel better with one section or the other? Or I'm kind of neck and neck, but do I feel like it's easier for me to improve on punctuation? Do I feel like it's easier for me to improve on this reading comp section? No nature of some of those questions that are there in the writing of the SAT. Okay, moving on to the essay. The SAT, here's the deal. It basically doesn't matter. There are almost no colleges that really care about this. For the ones that ask about it, you simply need to do well enough. Meaning, if a college says, please, we want the essay, don't screw around. Don't, try to take it relatively seriously. But for the kids that I work with doing all this one-on-one test prep, I spend about 98% of our time on all the sections of the ACT or all the sections of the SAT, and then about 2% of our time on the essay. Partly, you guys are kind of academic. You have a lot of experience writing essays. Big picture, the ACT, they give you a prompt, they give you 3 perspectives, and then they ask you to write intelligently about that topic. The SAT, they give you an essay, and then you ask you to evaluate how that essay is made. How did they effectively, how basically did the author make her argument? For both situations, the takeaways are, write as much as you can, which real English teachers hate, but here we are. Be as detailed as you can. The ACT prompt, for example, the one that called the ACT Shares Online, is about intelligent machines. So those kind of automated things which we can all use at the grocery store and checkout and avoid talking to people. Or you call up a phone and something and it's the voicemail phone tree and it asks you questions and you answer and it gets you blah, blah, blah. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? They give you 3 perspectives. One person said, it's a great thing. We don't have people doing boring jobs, or we don't have people doing dangerous jobs, and so these machines are awesome. We have someone at the other end said, this is terrible. We're all just talking to machines and we never talk to each other. That's terrible. And there's someone in between. How do you write about this? You talk about what you know about these technologies in your own life, and you either give your own perspective or you take one or more of these perspectives and kind of just go off on it. Write as much as you can. Be as detailed as you can. The SAT essay is much more like an AP Lang. Someone's made an argument about global warming and air conditioning, and you basically say, how has this author made a really compelling argument for why air conditioning is a bad idea? Not, do I agree with her? Do I disagree with her? How has she done this? Okay? Again, for anyone who's doing AP Lang, kind of the same thing. There's probably more than I should have shared with you about the essays because they don't really matter that much. But again, if you do them, take them seriously-ish. But again, 2% of your effort on this, 98% on the scores that really matter, composite or 1600 score of SAT. Last thing, the science. This for most people is the most like, what is this? It's really not a science section. And so a lot of times people come to this, they're kind of freaked out, they don't know what to do. My colleague, who's our Director of Education, Aaron Golumsky, who's doing the AP Chem class on Mondays, if you're taking AP Chem, fantastic, brilliant, kind of nerdy guy, PhD in chemical engineering from UCal Berkeley, nerd. I mean, a cool nerd, and he's really tall, so I get gotta be nice, but really unbelievable science guy. What's his feeling about the ACT science section? It's not a science section. It's the reading charts and graphs section, meaning we have information that's presented in charts and graphs rather than just paragraphs, and we answer questions about it. I say this because if you're this year doing chemistry and you're like, I haven't taken physics yet, how can I take the science section? Or taking physics and you're like, I haven't taken chemistry, how can I do this? It's not about content knowledge in biology, physics, or chemistry. Is there content on biology, chemistry, and physics? Yes, there is. But it's given to you on the passage. It's given to you in the text. It's given to you on the test. So this is really about your ability to read stuff and answer questions. It's reading comprehension, taking stuff out of some sentences and some little paragraphs, but more importantly, out of charts and graphs. I last studied chemistry in 1987. Yes, I know, I turned 87 this year. I'm possibly old. I don't have to know the underlying science, and neither do you. Because in addition to chem and physics and biology, there's also meteorology and geology and volcanology, the study of volcanoes, in case you're interested. And you have not studied this stuff, and you don't have to know it. The information is presented in there. To be fair, there's usually 2 or 3 questions. I'm sorry, I got a pop-up. There are usually 2 or 3 questions that are something about outside knowledge, but it's usually something like chlorophyll. How do plants make it? Or what's the X versus the Y chromosome, right? Or maybe it's knowing basics about global warming. They're going to be really straightforward things, and typically there's one, maybe two questions on that. So even if it's something you don't know, it's never going to wreck your score. And this is important. The right answer on the science will never be inconsistent with your own logic or with your own common sense or anything that you've learned in a science class or on the Discovery Channel or online. These people, again, want the ACT makers want this to be a test that reflects what you're doing in school. And so everything, all the knowledge that you bring can help you, but if you get a passage that you haven't, about a content that you've never studied, volcanoes, the answers will be in there. So don't panic on the ACT science if this feels really new to you. If you're good with reading comprehension on the ACT, you should expect to be good with the science on the ACT. Does that make sense? Again, any questions, throw them at me. I'm going to try one more time to do a poll, but apparently it is not going to let me do it. So the question for me, if you guys want to throw it to me in the Q&A, is if you have done any preparation, what have you been doing? Have you done stuff in school? Have you done stuff with Khan Academy? You've just gotten a book, or you're working with taking a class that's been probably now canceled, doing a tutor? I'm just curious to kind of get a sense of where things are. All right, and let me just run through this a couple more slides that I think are important. Some really small differences here. The ACT, this is kind of cool if you've not taken an ACT. You can take the test. You get the score back. If you're like, that's the worst test ever, you can delete the score after you've gotten it back, which is kind of cool. So be brave, be courageous, go up there and swing for the fences. And if you whiff, take the test again, get a higher score the second time, and then just delete that first score. SAT doesn't have quite the same thing. They have score test cancellation, meaning that go and take the test, you think you're super prepared, and if it's a disaster, you can cancel the test that day or by the Wednesday after the test. Multi-day testing, this is basically for students who have extra time accommodations because of language-based learning disability or dyslexia or anxiety or depression or all sorts of different reasons why people have extra time, ADHD. The ACT has these things. If you have specific questions about those accommodations, shoot me an email. Retake individual sections. You guys might have seen this, but the ACT is trying to launch in September a single section retake, which means that you have to take the full ACT first. If you take it in June or take it in July, and you crush 3 sections, but one section is like, not as good as you want. ACT is trying to launch in September, again, maybe complicated with the coronavirus, the ability to allow people to go and retake just the one section where they want to do better. They're going to do this on a computer. They're going to do it through local testing centers. There's one right here in Bethesda. Prometrics, I think, is where they may do it, or they may do it at their schools, still working this stuff out. But allowing people to retake just the one section that they want. We talked about the conflicts for the SAT. If you're needing to take subject tests, know that those are going to be on the same day in June as the SAT. So you can't take subject tests and the SAT in June. So if you really are at a school that wants the subject test, maybe do that in June, maybe do the ACT the following week. I'm looking at the Q&A really fast. Some preparation, Khan Academy, great. Yeah, Khan Academy, they've done beautiful work with that. I think that it's really good for presentation of facts. From my perspective, they don't kind of get at the kind of tricks as much as I think we want to, but I'll try to share some of those tricks with you. I think they're a great resource for kind of straightforward, here's how you do the content on this stuff. Somebody had to go to music lesson. Thanks, Colin, I love it. See you next week. So a couple more things, and again, if you think about any questions of things you want me to clarify or things I haven't asked yet, you can start throwing those into the Q&A. I love your questions. For those of you who are still with me, it's so great to be here on a Friday afternoon. We just did that. We just did that. So here's kind of a summation. And these are kind of gross stereotypes. But the kids who generally do better on the ACT relative to the SAT, they're kind of academic, they like things straightforward. I'll put my nose to the grindstone, I'll work really hard. The SAT in some ways tends to over-reward people who are really bright, but they like the shortcut, they like the angle. Because some of the things on the SAT are kind of more clever than hard, the people who are looking for the angle oftentimes like the SAT better. And again, this isn't always, but just kind of a way to look at this big picture. The reads for pleasure are people who are fundamentally readers. They like playing with language, right? As opposed to, I'll read it to get it done. They read it because they really enjoy it. ACT fast workers, ACT does give a premium to people who can read fast enough to get through stuff. So that's kind of a big deal. So if you are a fast reader, even if you're a great reader, but know if you're a fast reader, if you're fast enough to get through the passage on the reading comprehension on the ACT and not have to rush, you should expect to get every single problem right there. We're going to talk more about this later about how to go about that. But being fast is a huge premium on the ACT. Doesn't mean if you're not fast that this is not a test that you should take, but just keep that one in mind. All right, a couple more things. Power means hard, speed, okay? Yeah. Oh, that's extended time. Yeah, so if you're a student who has extra time accommodations, in my experience, you want to take the ACT if you can get accommodations. Because so much of the time, so much of the difficulty in the ACT is based on the fact that people don't have quite enough time. If your student, for appropriate reasons, has extra time accommodations in school, that's probably going to make the ACT be a better test for you than the SAT, because that speediness, when you have more time, extra time on the ACT helps more on the ACT than does extra time on the SAT. Okay, that's the end of that. The whole calendar of tests. And then here's the last thing I want to talk about, and then I'll take your questions. So this is a performance curve. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And so we see across the bottom, across the x-axis, quick math review, it's stress. And that's measured in a brain chemical called cortisol. And what we need is we need some stress to sort of get engaged. And right at the top, when we have enough, we're excited, but we're not overwhelmed. But if we have too much stress, then all of a sudden our performance falls apart. And I spend a lot of time working with kids who are really academic, they go to wonderful schools, they work super hard, they're really bright, and they underperform on tests. And they get super upset and they wonder why. And a huge part of this is just that being a little bit anxious, having a little bit of butterflies, the science shows that actually helps you perform better. But if it's too much, then the thinking part of your brain kind of gets scrambled. And this is why things that can seem easy when there's not pressure feel hard on the day of the test. And so after all the stuff that I've talked about with SAT versus ACT, one of the things that is most important is if you tiptoe through some of these sections of the English on the ACT versus the writing on the SAT, blah, 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 is which one feels better? Which one do you like better? Which one you might say, that was kind of hard, but I'm pretty sure that if I work hard at that, I'm going to get better at this. Because that sense of control, that sense of I can handle this, my hard work will get me there, lowers your stress and helps us think better. And we're going to have a whole webinar about this in a few weeks, about the science of stress and underperformance and what all the productive things that you can do to help yourself be at your best when the pressure feels kind of high. But what I want you to think about, and kind of a parting shot for today, is if you're trying to figure out SAT and ACT, if one of them, the scores are just fantastically high, well, clearly that's the test you want to take. But if it seems like it's kind of neck and neck, I want you to think about, which test feels better for me? Which one do I like better? Which one do I feel like I can grow on? Because that sense of comfort will lower your stress. And so when you do all this hard work that you're doing and we'll ideally do together here, when you get to the test and you feel a little jittery, and you're going to feel jittery. I go and take the SAT and ACT, I feel jittery, and I'm like 1,000 years old. We anticipate you're going to be a little jittery. And if we can say the one that I feel more comfortable with, all those wonderful thoughts, all that terrific stuff you've learned is going to be more accessible when you feel less jittery than more jittery. And so the test that you like better, unless the scores are wildly out of range, the test that you simply feel more at ease with and feels more like your speed, that you just feel more comfortable with, is the test for you to take. Okay? All right, let me look really quickly at other questions. Best free resources for ACT practice. Okay, so it's a really good question. The easiest way, so first of all, Khan Academy is great for instruction. So if you're like, wait, how do radians work? What do I do with that? Or I never learned radians. What is he talking about? What the heck is radian? Khan Academy has this partnership with College Board, who's the people who make the SAT. But in terms of the content, particularly on the math, ACT, the Khan Academy is a wonderful resource. There's some kind of free or pseudo-free, relatively inexpensive work preparation that ACT is doing with Kaplan, which is a kind of group like ours, but they do a lot of classes. So you can go over to ACT.org and look at their resources. If you're looking for practice tests, the easiest thing to do for SAT is to go to Khan Academy, and there are 10 practice tests on there. You Google Khan Academy SATs, you'll find 10 SATs on there. ACT doesn't currently publish for free practice tests. The two resources that I'd suggest are, one, if you can afford the 18 bucks, if you just go on Amazon, the ACT has maybe. Has an official college guide, official ACT prep guide, and their 5 practice tests in here. The great part is they have explanations to every single question that's on the test. Again, it tends to be, like I was saying before, a little bit kind of the more academic, the proper nerdy way to do it, not kind of the trick way that I want you to know. And in addition to this, if you don't want to drop 17 bucks or you're just looking for practice tests, just Google ACT PDF, and they're all over the place, all these practice tests, and you can just print one out or you can do it online. Those things are all copyright protected, so in good conscience, I don't really want to send those to you. The fact that there are all sorts of people that have those available online, that's on them. I think if you pull it down and use it, totally cool. There's a group called, well, you'll find it's probably the top of the list, where they have 5 practice tests on there. I will be sharing, starting next week, resources of a whole bunch of grammar stuff, and we'll send this in advance to all of you guys so you can work through it, or you can do it after the fact along with explanations. Here's how you do all the grammar. We're going to talk through trigonometry. We're going to do all this algebra stuff. So we'll be sharing stuff with you guys. But if you want practice tests for the SAT, go to the Khan Academy. If you want ACT, just Google ACT PDF, and you'll probably find there are a bunch of websites. I've been to a bunch of them with like 50 practice tests and more stuff than you could ever do. Let's see what else we got for any questions. It looks like that's about it. I've kept you guys a little longer than I wanted to. You were remarkably well, very attentive and well-behaved and well-mannered. I really appreciate your hanging with me. For those of you who tried to join on Tuesday and we kind of shut you out, I really apologize for that. Next week, again, we'll be talking about colons, semicolons, dashes, commas, all the nerdy grammar, all the nerdy punctuation, excuse me, that is important for the SAT or ACT, no matter what you're taking. If you have specific questions, you can email back classes@prepmatters.com. You can, if you're on Twitter, you can send it to @prepmatters or to me @Ned Johnson. You can go on our website and find my email, or it's nedjohnson@prepmatters.com if you want to do that. Obviously, school is hugely disrupted for you guys. College admissions next year are going to be a little bit funky, but obviously you guys are working hard. You still want to go to college, and you're working hard, and so we here, and I especially, am particularly interested in anything that I can do to help you guys. If you have specific questions or have suggestions of, gosh, it would be really cool if you did this, please send us a message. You guys are the experts on you. We're just doing our best to help, and I really appreciate you hanging out with me, and I hope to see you guys all next Tuesday. Thanks very much, and have a great weekend.